Is there a doorway beyond the final breathing invitation into a realm where every heartbeat and breath are rewritten? In this incredible near-death account, former motor transport specialist Chase Donovan found himself on the brink of eternity, twice first battling a devastating flu that laid him low in Santa Barbara, then in a split-second crash on a quiet autumn road. Under the surgeon's scalpel, with anesthesia flooding his veins and his heart stilled, he awoke weightless in corridors of polished marble, guided through tunnels of living starlight, and greeted by every beloved creature he had ever known. At the journey's end, a radiant presence spoke one shattering truth: there is no death. Stay with us to uncover how this passage through light and love reshaped Chase's purpose, ignited an unshakable faith, and revealed the limitless power of compassion that waits for each soul on the other side. Share your thoughts below on which moment resonates most, and subscribe to join us in exploring more life-changing journeys beyond the veil. I still remember the day the flu found me, even though I'd been the one running towards sickness rather than away from it. It was the winter of '94, and I was stationed at Station 11 in Santa Barbara, serving on the paramedic engine as its lead engineer. Our days were a blur of sirens and stacked stretches of the local hospitals overflowing with feverish bodies, coughs rattling like distant drumbeats. I drove us from one desperate call to the next, adrenaline my constant companion. One evening, we arrived at a tiny, windowless room where a middle-aged woman lay so still, it felt as though death had already claimed her. Every sign pointed to collapse or rapid breathing, sunken eyes, skin the color of ash. With no time to hesitate, I grabbed the oxygen tank and vaulted across her bed, sliding onto the edge and pressing the mask against her face. As I tightened the straps, she drew the deepest exhale I've ever heard relief turn breathed. In that single inhalation, I felt her life surge back into me as though her lungs were inoculating mine. I laughed aloud, thinking back to the biblical promise that those who give breath to the people and life to those who walk in death are truly instruments of grace. Within 48 hours, I was back home in my own bed, but the tables had turned. My body, trained to save, was betrayed by its own defenses. I lay there in darkness, shivering beneath thin sheets, every muscle protesting. My heart pounded so fiercely, I feared it would break free. When I couldn't even find a pulse at my wrist, I realized my blood pressure had plummeted and my strength had vanished. Desperation turned my words to a rasp as I weakly dialed my sister's number. I heard my niece answer, her voice urgent in my ear, and I tried to speak, but only a ghost of a whisper emerged. She didn't need Moresh hung up and summoned help. In minutes, Santa Barbara County Fire burst through my door, their faces etched with concern, and within moments, I was strapped to a stretcher once more. But this time, I was the patient speeding toward the same hospital wards I'd helped staff only days before. They didn't hesitate for a single heartbeat. As soon as the paramedics arrived at my door, they plunged my veins full of high-flow saline, the cold rush sliding up my arms like glacier water. I watched through half-closed eyes as they worked with surgical precision, adjusting IV poles, flicking stopcocks, murmuring reassurances to one another. Every face I saw grizzled veterans of too many crises etched with fierce determination, as if they were architects rebuilding a collapsing cathedral. By the time I was strapped onto the stretcher and hurtled through the flashing red and blue of the ambulance lights, my body felt as hollow as an ancient stone vault. Inside the emergency ward place, so crowded, it throbbed like a wounded heart. The staff moved like angels on a mission. Hallways teemed with frightened children clutching blankets and elderly couples whose eyes pleaded for relief. Every bed held someone gasping for breath, fighting the same brutal flu that had swept through Santa Barbara with merciless force. Nurses in crisp scrubs swapped out IV bags as if in a silent ballet, each bag another lifeline meant to buoy my failing strength. Over the next 12 hours, I would receive 11 liters of fluids, enough to fill a bath tube-back drip, a lifeline whispering, "Stay with us." I felt no bitterness toward fate or frustration at my own weakness. Instead, I sensed that every drop was carrying me toward an extraordinary crossroads, a pivot point in a story far larger than my own mortality. Late that afternoon, the nurse reappeared at my bedside, carrying 2 syringes of medication, strong opioid for pain, and an anti-nausea drug to calm my queasy stomach. My wife sat beside me, her hand trembling as she smoothed the hospital sheets over my legs. I attempted to stand, insisting I was well enough to go home, but her gentle shake of the head forestalled my protest. The nurse explained that these infusion orders were universal for flu patients that day. With a practiced flourish, she injected the drugs into my IV port. I felt a warm flood course through me, then nothing. My consciousness tumbled like a leaf in a storm. My wife later told me she and the staff panicked, injecting Narcan, the opioid antidote, 3 times before my heart began to beat again. They charted my collapse as code blue and moved me to intensive care, arming me with every monitor and breathing tube they could find. Somewhere between the sterile smell of antiseptic and the soft click of machines recalibrating, I felt myself unmoored from my fragile human shell. One second I lay tethered to tubes, every beep echoing my mortality. The next, I rose into a realm of starlight, so vast I felt my soul unfurl like a sail catching divine wind. Planets wheeled overhead in slow arcs, galaxies glimmered like distant lanterns, and every spark of light seemed to pulse with a welcome I had never known on Earth. In that moment I understood the promise of John 10:10. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I knew I was tasting that abundance, free from fear, pain, and every shadow that haunts the mind. Gratitude flooded me as fiercely as the IV fluids had hours before. My heart soared in that boundless sky, each beat a testament to the miracle unfolding far beyond any hospital's walls. I could never have imagined such a welcome home, yet there I was, weightless and free, drifting through an ocean of stars whose light felt like the tender touch of a mother's hand. Each orb shimmered with a life all its own, pulsing in silent music that resonated deep in my bones. I was neither alone nor unseen. I was celebrated. In that moment, I understood what the Apostle John meant when he wrote, "God is love," in 1 John 4-8. Every hurt I had carried every flicker of anger, every ember of spite, every coil of jealousy vanished like smoke before a gentle breeze. Those emotions belonged to the small world I had left behind. Up here, there was only the purity of acceptance, the warmth of unconditional love, the rapture of unbroken joy. I soared past nebulae that glowed in hues beyond any earthly rainbow, and through corridors of light so vast they seemed woven from pure grace. My exhilaration was not a momentary burst, but a constant, soaring tide, like the crescendo of the universe itself. It felt as if all the triumphs of my life landing a thrilling role in community theater, the pride of running my first marathon, the wonder I saw in a child's eyes at Disney World had been distilled into a single, magnificent anthem of being. I recognized that those fleeting glimpses of elation on Earth scoring the winning touchdown or finally receiving a cherished promotion were but ripples on the shore of this boundless ocean of bliss. I thought of the story of King David dancing before the ark in 2 Samuel 6, his heart unrestrained in pure worship. Here I was, not on a dirt floor, but at the heart of creation, dancing in cosmic light. I did not want to return to my human frame, yet I knew with total certainty that my purpose awaited me back among the living. For now, I floated in this celestial embrace, letting the infinite love of the stars fill me completely and knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. I felt myself swell into a living constellation, an immense cloud of light unfurling across eternity. Every fiber of my being vibrated in perfect harmony, as though the entire cosmos had orchestrated a symphony just for me. In that boundless expanse, I tasted the purest essence of joy, unending cosmic celebration, more overwhelming than the most triumphant cheers of a sold-out stadium or the thrill of watching Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon. I drifted free of gravity and fear, released from the cramped, shadowy closet of my old identity. All around me, the universe pulsed with a living heartbeat. I marveled at how I had once believed myself to be merely Chase Donovan, bound by mistakes and regrets. Every doubt I'd ever nursed, every sting of shame or flicker of envy, melted away like frost under the morning sun. In that moment, I understood what Jesus meant when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. The truth was that at my core, I was this radiant, limitless being, not an anxious young man with emotional triggers waiting to blow me off course. Yet even as I soared, I remembered Bill Lutzon's own words about returning with full awareness of his life story, yet feeling no desire to reclaim it. I knew every detail of Chase Donovan's past, the triumphs that made me proud, the failures that haunted me, yet none of it held sway over me anymore. I liked Chase Donovan. He had the courage of a marathon runner and the compassion of a volunteer firefighter. But in truth, I was something far greater than that mortal name. My soul, unshackled at last, floated on waves of pure love and purpose, ready to return to this world with the certainty that my true self could never be diminished again. As I drifted weightless through that radiant expanse, the idea of returning to my flesh felt as absurd as clutching a discarded banana peel. My soul yearned to roam free among the stars. Why would I ever want to be tethered again to a body that groaned with pain and fear? Yet without warning, the luminescent cloud around me dissolved into hard edges and fluorescent glow. I found myself standing on a smooth floor beneath soft, indirect lighting. Rows of gleaming gurneys stretched out like silent witnesses, and medical instruments dangled from the ceiling like metallic vines in a strange forest. Ahead of me stood three small figures, each cloaked in deep charcoal hoods, with only their wide, childlike grins visible. Their squat bodies and oversized heads reminded me uncannily of the shadowy beings in Steven Spielberg's film Communion. And I later learned I was not alone in that association. Countless experiencers have written to say, "Those warthog men stole my breath when I saw them under the hooded light." Their presence was neither hostile nor frightening. Instead, they radiated a mischievous warmth that put me at ease, even as I trembled with wonder. One of them stepped forward and gently beckoned. His smile as knowing as much as the scream is intensian, unlikely bond between the surreal and the familiar. In that moment, I recalled Jesus' promise that the least of these are never abandoned, Matthew 25-40, and I felt these beings acting as caretakers of my soul, guiding me through a hospice of the spirit. Their silent encouragement washed over me, and I realized that even in this clinical cloak of ceilings and gurneys, love had found a way to shine through. As they drifted back into the soft lamplight, I sensed that their task here was simple yet profound, to welcome weary travelers home. I stood rooted between two worlds, still tasting the freedom of the cosmos, yet feeling an irresistible pull to return and fulfill the next chapter of my journey. In that quiet, surreal clinic, I understood that no matter how strange the guides or how unsettling the surroundings, every encounter was stitched together by a single thread love that beckons us ever onward. They couldn't have looked more mischievous if they tried. One of the squat figures hopped forward, his tiny hands clasped behind his back, and peered up at me with eyes that glittered like polished onyx. "So," he asked in a playful chirp, "how was it? What did you see? What did you learn?" His two companions wiggled in unison, the furthest thing from menacing. To me, they felt more like childhood friends playing hide and seek in grandmother's attic than otherworldly caretakers. I blinked, utterly baffled, my heart pounding with bemusement. I stammered. "If this is all moving too fast, I'm still trying to figure out why I'm here." As if on cue, the first little hooded fiend leaned over and whispered to his cohorts. One leaned in, stroked his chin thoughtfully, then let out a tinkling laugh that echoed down the corridor. "He doesn't remember us," they chorused, bouncing like children on a sugar rush. In that moment, their giggles felt less like taunts and more like a balm soothing my confusion. Then, as if summoned by some silent cue, a tall, willowy figure glided forward from the shadows. His robe was the purest alabaster white, cinched with a sash of crimson that glowed softly. His smile was electrifying, every corner of his eyes crinkled in delight, and his laughter rolled over me in gentle waves. As he approached, my throat constricted and my chest swelled with such intense love that tears threatened to spill. It reminded me of Psalm 63:3. "Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you." This being's presence was love incarnate, overwhelming in its purity and power. In that instant, I knew I was in the presence of something infinitely tender, infinitely wise, and infinitely home. I found myself beaming at the memory, my heart still aglow from that first spark of connection. He chuckled again, that gentle, rumbling laugh that seemed to resonate in my bones, and in that moment, I truly understood what a father's love must feel like: the unconditional pride, the tender patience, the unspoken affirmation that every choice I'd made, right or wrong, was part of a story worth telling. I felt a swell of affection so powerful that I could almost see it shimmering in the air between us. Gathering my courage, I blurted out, I don't want to go back there. No way, no how. I'm not ready." His laughter tinkled like wind chimes, and he leaned in, as if indulging a curious child. "All right then," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Tell us what's next. Shall we review your life?" That suggestion made me feel 10 feet tall and 10 years old all at once. With a nervous grin, I launched into my story how my wife and I had once dreamed of escaping to a tiny coral atoll, an island wilderness accessible only by helicopter, where we'd live simply among sea turtles and nesting birds. I described the promise of dawn patrols on turquoise waves and evenings, spent under a canopy of stars so brilliant they rivaled the realm I'd just left behind. My guide's eyes lit up at my words, and I nearly laughed aloud when he clapped his hands like a delighted spectator at a theater premiere. It reminded me of the moment Moses first descended from Mount Sinai, carrying fresh commandments, and despite the gravity of his mission, he must have felt a similar mix of wonder and relief. For a heartbeat, I could almost taste the salt air of that island and feel the pulse of hope that once thrummed through my veins. Then I admitted I had chosen to stay in firefighting instead, craving the rush of engines and sirens more than the solitude of palms and tide pools. My voice cracked when I confessed that part of me regretted that decision. My wife had longed for that serene life, and I had put her dream on hold. As I spoke, the light in his eyes deepened, and he nodded in silent understanding, as if to say that every what if has its place in shaping who we become. In that sacred space, I realized that true freedom doesn't lie in the absence of choices, but in the courage to own them, just as Joseph, sold into Egypt, later claimed his destiny to forgive and to lead. And in that moment, I felt more alive than ever, ready to face whatever lay beyond that final threshold. I watched in stunned silence as the tall, gentle leader waved a hand, and the jovial trio of hooded guides melted away, as if called to a different duty. Their cheerful chatter vanished, and suddenly it was just the two of us standing in that hushed marble hall. He looked at me with those kind, knowing eyes and simply said, "It's time to return." His voice carried no judgment, only a firm compassion that felt like a father guiding a reluctant child. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it might burst free of my chest. I found my voice, but it trembled with panic. "Wait," I stammered. "I can't go back. I'm not done here. I don't want to go back." My words hung heavy in the air. I pictured my wife's face, my children's laughter, none of it compared to the boundless peace I'd just tasted. He inclined his head, sorrowful, yet resolute, then stepped forward. In that instant, I felt the world around me begin to dissolve. The ornate columns faded into streaks of light. The cool marble beneath my feet gave way to nothingness. I was being drawn backward, as though the universe itself were inhaling me. Memories of my own mortality flashed before me. That cricket chirped surgery room, the shrill calls of my sister's voice, the sterile glare of fluorescent lights. It felt like sliding down a hidden chute, the air rushing past me, darker and denser with each passing second. I thought of Jonah in the belly of the great fish, trapped in the in-between, yearning for the comfort of dry land, even as he prayed for deliverance. My resistance only tightened the pull. I wanted to scream, to beg for more time, but there was no breath, left only the solemn acknowledgement that my journey was not yet complete. Then, just as the darkness seemed all-consuming, a spark of recognition flickered in my soul. I realized that every step I'd ever taken, every choice and sacrifice, had led me to this exact moment. The descent carried me homeward, back to a life brimming with purpose and unfinished dreams. And though I could not see it yet, I knew that coming back was itself a gift of sacred calling to honor the wisdom I'd been given and share it with a world still waiting to awaken. I awoke to a world of fluorescent glare and hurried footsteps, my chest tight as if I'd been gasping for air in some vast, empty void. For a moment, I was stranded in that dismal realm and echo chamber of solitude where even hope felt distant before the familiar weight of my body pulled me back. My eyes snapped open, and a nurse hovered over me, her brow etched with relief. "You're awake," she exclaimed, voice trembling as though she'd just found me at the edge of an abyss. I blinked, disoriented, every part of me still humming with the resonance of that cold, lonely place. "Yeah," I rasped, hoarse with disbelief. "But first, where did I go? Why am I here?" She looked startled, as if I'd asked her to explain the sunrise. "Go see the doctor," she stammered, glancing at the monitors and IV lines like they held the answers. "We didn't know if you'd make it." I shoved off the covers, anger and wonder warring behind my eyes. "I wasn't here," I insisted. "I was home surrounded by friends, laughing under an endless night sky of stars." My words tumbled out, raw and urgent. I was convinced I'd bought the farm, as they say so certain that this return was a cosmic glitch. She offered a soft smile, one seasoned by many crises. "Honey, you were in escrow, but you fell out of escrow. Now you're back with us. It might take a minute to wrap your head around that." Her analogy struck me as strangely perfect. Just as Ecclesiastes reminds us that to everything there is a season, I'd glimpsed eternity, but was called back to time's chores. I remembered the teachings of my friend, an old Marine-turned-yoga instructor, who'd urged me, "Chop wood, carry water. This is your battlefield now." So I settled back into my skin, resolved to honor the second chance I'd been given. In that sterile room, amid beeping machines and whispered prayers, I vowed to live each moment as a warrior of light rooted in the ordinary, yet forever guided by that vast, star-filled realm I once called home. Then I realized my journey wasn't over the moment I drew breath again in that hospital bed. As mystics from all traditions remind us, pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians 5:17. We return from the threshold of death, not to languish, but to live fully. I understood that my task was to carry the vibration of that star-lit realm into every heartbeat, every choice. I had to honor those celestial guides by showing up bravely in the small moments. The colleague who needed a kind word, the stranger who required a listening ear, the family member craving forgiveness. I pictured a blacksmith hammering red-hot iron. Each act of compassion was a strike forging my soul into something stronger. Conversely, moments of selfishness or cruelty would cool me into brittle steel, destined to crack under life's pressure. We have all encountered people whose bitterness or envy has weighed them down, sad echoes of the shadowed places I glimpsed. If I allowed those attitudes to take root again, I would tether myself to that dismal frequency, unable to ascend. Yet countless near-death testimonies confirm that self-forgiveness and repentance can realign us. I thought of Corrie ten Boom, who survived Nazi camps and later preached forgiveness even to her captor's life, a testament that mercy triumphs over judgment, James 2:13. Like her, I could transform my trial into a testimony of grace. I resolved that whenever my vibration slipped, when impatience or resentment stirred, I would remind myself of that boundless love I once flew through and choose again. Some survivors speak of descending to darker realms after death, only to reclaim the light through a simple act of faith, singing a hymn, offering a prayer, or recalling a memory of love. One woman, immobilized by coma, spontaneously began singing Amazing Grace, and in that moment her spirit soared back from the brink. I knew then that our lowest seasons can become the very crucible in which our souls are purified. So I stumbled out of that hospital room, determined to chop wood and carry water, to embrace the mundane tasks as sacred rituals. Every sunrise, every cup of coffee, every conversation with a friend became an opportunity to recreate that cosmic vibration. My mission was clear: to live in such a way that when I crossed back over, my guides would nod with pride, knowing I had honored the gift of life by shining its light on others.